Well, it would appear that not all is well between the ANC and its tripartite alliance partners. It's after President Cyril Ramaphosa was chased away from a Cosatu Workers' Day rally in the northwest this past weekend. Now, some experts say this should serve as a warning to the ANC. For more on that, we're joined by former Cosatu General Secretary Jay Naidoo and Labour analyst Terry Bell. Good evening to both of you. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Jay, just, looking at an interview done by News 24 with Minister Gwede Mantashe, he's suggesting that Cosatu deliberately set up the president for embarrassment by the way in which it arranged the program. It seems bizarre, but you understand these issues a lot better than I do. What's happening here?
Well, Kathy, I'm not involved in Cosatu anymore, but from my involvement at the founding of Cosatu and for a number of successive terms that I held the position of General Secretary, I would find that those statements misplaced. Maybe there's such an alienation between the Cosatu leadership itself and the grassroots that they have not picked up the signals, which is a barometer to all politicians in this country, that the population of this country, including workers, are fed up. They've had enough. They are calling, like 60 million other South Africans, for decisive action. In relation to the major challenges that face our people, the fact that 70% of young people coming out of 12 years of education have very few skills, no jobs, and unlikely to have a job in their lifetime. The fact that in the COVID pandemic, hundreds of thousands of workers have lost their jobs. People have lost homes. And we're having a situation in this country where unemployment is probably the highest in the world. And inequality, now we distinguish ourselves as being the pariah of inequality in the world. Not as in the past when we were an apartheid state. So I think, what this is telling us, all of us, is that people have had enough. And it brings me back to the 80s where, in fact, the change and the paralysis in terms of the country, the stalemate with the apartheid state that created the conditions for negotiations for a new beginning, was because people had had enough. Not because leaders were very clever and made very militant speeches, but because people are fed up. Fed up with crime, fed up with unemployment, fed up with hunger, fed up with the lack of progress in terms of the basic needs of our people, and particularly the inaction of the government on the involvement of senior officials, senior business people, both local and international, that have been implicated in the Zondo Commission of Inquiry into state capture. And we still have to see the action taken to retrieve the almost 50 billion rand that have been looted from the national treasury.
Sure.
And the untold consequences for the rest of the economy. So I think it's a sign to all of us, not just the president, or to Gwede Mantashe.
Terry, what do you make of the fact that there now seems to be finger-pointing that is taking place, and, the concerns that are being raised by these workers, even by the action of driving senior leaders out of that stadium in the way they did earlier on this week, that does not seem to have taken center stage?
I agree with what Jay has just said. The point is, yes, people are, to use that very crude term, hotfall. They've had it. They're really angry, and for justifiable reasons. When they announced that they were sending the president to Rustenburg, I thought, this is crazy. He can't accept that. A, you don't normally have the president going to a Cosatu rally in the first place. But B, you don't send Cyril Ramaphosa to Rustenburg, which is at the time of a major strike at Sibanye Gold, admittedly, which involves NUM and AMCU. This is the Platinum Belt, where the memory of Marikana, I'm sorry to say, is very, very real still, where people, and miners in particular, are angry about no prosecutions having followed on that. And also remember that the president was involved in an embarrassing degree in that massacre. So you don't send someone there, which is why I understand why Gwede Mantashe could say, well, he was set up. it's easy to say it looks conspiratorial, and there may be so many factions and fractions within COSATU as well as the alliance that someone could have suggested it, but no one really thought it through. From a public relations viewpoint, it was a total disaster. But it does, of course, undermine the position of Cyril Ramaphosa, where at a time when there's all sorts of jockeying for the top position in the ANC and therefore the presidency. So there's a lot of politics involved. There's a lot of fragmentation and factionalism going on. Whose knives are sitting in whose backs and who's plunging them in, we don't even know at this stage. We can make assumptions and make guesses, but what it boils down to is it's a mess. And as far as the alliance itself goes, I've always, as Jay knows from way back, have always opposed the idea of the trade unions being in an alliance with any government on the grounds that workers are organized into unions and federations as workers, irrespective of their political, their religious, whatever backgrounds they have. They're the reserve army of the working class who can then come together and decide in common what they want as policies. As Jay will recall, in 1996, the trade union movement came together as a movement, the three major federations then, it was COSATU, FEDUSA, and, what became FEDUSA, and NACTU, and produced the Social Equity and Job Creation document, which I think, hardly revolutionary, but I thought was a very sensible macroeconomic policy that put forward the idea of redistribution leading to growth, rather than the trickle-down theory that the government came up with, supported by big business. So sooner or later, I kept saying, I'm just amazed that the alliance has lasted as long as it has. And I think the glue that has kept it together has been the South African Communist Party, which quite honestly, I think, supports the idea of conveyor belt unionism, because they see themselves as eventually taking over from the ANC, and because they are the true representatives, they proclaim, of all the working class. Therefore, it'll be a workers' government, which, of course, it's not. That's a form of what I would call state capitalism.
Terry, what do you think this tells us about the relationship between COSATU and its members? Would it have been easy for the COSATU president to take the microphone and try and speak to those workers?
The point is, you see, there's a division that's opened up now between the leadership, and I'd like to hear Jay's comment on this, between the leadership and the membership. We now have leaders who have, particularly since the growth of investment companies, have, shall we say, had lifestyles which go way beyond anything that existed in the past. We also have a situation where whole unions, such as the chemical, pulp and paper workers, have just collapsed because of fingers in tills to hundreds of millions of rand. So we have, I don't know, I think the unions have lost their way in those terms, and many of the leadership have then been subsumed. We have Tulas Nesi, former SADTU, who's in government. We had Zokwana. We've had, you can name them, they move seamlessly from union leadership positions into government and into business and backwards and forwards. I think that's a very dangerous situation to set up, because what you then have is this conveyor belt which actually leaves the mass of the workers and stops the organization at a grassroots level. The shop stewards level is where it should be the most powerful within the unions. As far as I'm concerned, it hardly exists anymore at the moment.
Jay?
Well, I just want to go back to the beginning. We got to understand that as in the context of Mandela's release, the country was incredibly fragile. Violence spread across the country in an astounding pace, with devastating consequences for workers and communities. And it was in that context where COSATU, as a trade union movement, and I agree with Terry on this, was not a political party, but it had political aspirations. It was a new form of political unionism. And we had aspirations about not just worker rights, but about the shape of the democracy that would replace apartheid. And while we stood together in the big tent called the Mass Democratic Movement, led by the ANC, around a single demand of one person, one vote in a democratic, non-sexist South Africa, we understood that we also shared that tent with many different social forces, some whose interests were completely opposed to us. And so we made a strategic choice. And the choice was not to form an alliance with government. It was to form an alliance with the African National Congress and the Communist Party. Not on the issue of just we believe in you all because of your track record and because you speak the working class rhetoric, but on the basis of a program of action, which was the Reconstruction and Development Program. That was the social consensus that was built from the ground up that became the election manifesto on which the ANC won a landslide victory. Now, in relation to that alliance at a political level, it was very much our role, and in fact the way in which Cosatu elected me to lead 20 trade unionists into parliament on an ANC ticket caused its own controversy within the ANC. And so we ended up with a situation where the program of reconstruction and development was given to me to manage in the office of the president. But that's when the schisms that today have become open warfare still existed. And so when the ANC decided, secretly, not the ANC never decided that RDP should be closed and GEAR should be introduced. It was a secret negotiation outside the ANC NEC, outside cabinet, outside of parliament. When that decision was made, we destroyed the social consensus. And at that point, Cosatu should have asked, why are we in the alliance? Because are we just a vote bank? And that's what has been the consequence. We've become a vote bank. And the union movement has become increasingly fragmented. And what Terry refers to, business unionism, took over. So the degree to which the state has been captured, the same has happened in the trade union movement. And so we're having a tremendous alienation between leaders and membership. And young workers today do not join trade unions. They don't want anything to do with trade unions because they don't see them representing their interests. And in fact, with the disintegration and informalization of the formal economy, more and more jobs are being outsourced. Marikana was a consequence of outsourcing and brokering. And we see a fragmentation of the unions where something will happen. Something new must emerge. Just like in the old days, Taxa, which represented the old white unions, collapsed and were absorbed into Cosatu. I think the same thing is going to happen today, is that the new movement has to emerge if this conveyor belt business unionism comes to an end and workers take, again, control of the union movement.
All right.
And that's what I'm hopeful about.
Jay Naidoo, Terry Bell, that's all we have time for tonight. Thank you both for your insights on News at Prime.